I introduced myself last time, but I'll just like to show you this picture. This is me sitting here doing my PhD study in Vietnam, in the highlands of Vietnam towards the border of China. And I'm talking to people from these ethnic minority villages about water sanitation and hygiene programs. And this is a village health worker. And he's been put in charge for this water and sanitation and hygiene program by the government. And the government has told him that now he's responsible to change people's behaviors and improve the sanitation conditions. And I interviewed this guy about what it's like to have this job and what kind of challenges he's meeting. And this poor guy was so frustrated. You know, he doesn't have any education. He was given a 3 months crash course in health by the government, and now he's the health expert of the village. And he only has this health knowledge. He doesn't have any other tools, like he doesn't know what to do if people don't want the latrine they get from the government. Or he doesn't know how to explain to people why they need to wash their hands. And they say, well, I'm lazy, or well, I don't have soap, or I'm not really dirty, I just came from my fields, I didn't touch feces, so why should I wash my hands? He has no idea how to convince people to change their behaviors. So it was interesting to hear, and I learned a lot from him on how not to design these water and sanitation programs. So I'm going to discuss that with you today. We're going to have 3 kind of sessions. First, something about the social-cultural drivers, and we're going to learn something about the different approaches you can take to hygiene promotion if you want to change people's sanitation or water and hygiene behaviors. Yeah, that's actually, I think the last thing is actually, it's not supposed to be there. These are the 2 things. First, when I ask people about why do they behave like this, I think there was also a mentioning of different degrees of hygiene in different cultures. So often I hear, well, it's just their culture, they say. That's the culture in that place. That's why they don't behave like that. And when we use the word culture, what is the culture? What is the hygiene culture here? We need to understand something about this concept of culture. It's kind of like a big black box. But there are 2 layers of culture. You can say there are these aspects of culture that you can observe, those things that are the tip of the iceberg. Right? When you arrive to a new place, you can certainly tell, I'm in a different place now and in a different culture because they are eating different things, they are dressing in a different way, they are organized in a different ways, they speak a different language, and so on. But there are much, much more things under the surface here that's also part of people's cultures. And these are the things that are often guiding our behaviors. So these are the things that you need to understand in order to find out why are they behaving like this. Do they have some beliefs? Do they have some value systems? Do they have some assumptions about, for example, disease? I'm not getting sick from this type of dirt, or they have some habits. Maybe I'm very busy around 12. I need to run to the canteen to get before the others. And these things are creating hygiene and sanitation behaviors. And these things are, of course, incredibly difficult to get access to. Like, you can't see them. So you need to think hard, and you need to ask people, and you need to observe for some time in order to understand what's going on here. How do people think about this disease, or why do they behave like this? There are other social, cultural, and economic aspects that you can, these categories that you can think of if you want to evaluate or understand a certain culture. So you can think about these things in a certain setting. How is it organized? Are these things, how are they put in place in the site I'm going to do my sanitation intervention? And if you check all these things, you're already well informed about a lot of the social cultural aspects in your setting. So if you now for 5 minutes sit together or 10 minutes sit together with your group, your cases. Are you already organized around your cases? No? And discuss what do you think are some of these things that are very important in your setting for how people have organized their sanitation, for example, or what kind of things are creating certain hygiene behaviors. So I can give you an example. For example, caste, the top one, right? So in India, there is a caste system, and per definition, it's actually abandoned because the government doesn't want that people have this traditional way of classifying people in different social strata, right? But they're still there, and it will take quite a lot of generations to get rid of a caste system. So if I entered one southern Indian village and I looked at the water system, and I saw there were different taps around the village, and I really asked many times, so who is this tap, who is it for? And they said it's for everybody. It's for everybody. Everybody can take water here, every parts of the village. And then I waited for some days, and I was around when they opened the water, and I saw them putting up the pump. And suddenly I realized it's only the caste that's living in this part of the town who's allowed to touch that water. But nobody would tell me, because the caste system doesn't exist, right? And they know they're not supposed to talk about caste too much. But it really does create some very important water patterns in this village that you need to know of before you go in and decide something new. Right? So now sit in your cases and think for 10 minutes. Are there any of these things that are affecting hygiene, water and sanitation in your projects or in your cases? Yeah? So move around.
The original cases.
The Bangladesh and Tanzania cases and yeah. Affect the water and sanitation or hygiene practices in your site.
Well, right now we're discussing income.
Income?
That if you have a higher income, it's more probable that you also have access to clean water, have electricity, things like that.
Yeah. Where are you, in Tanzania or in India?
Kosovo. India.
India.
Mm.
And what place in India are you?
West Bengal.
Yeah.
Mm.
And do you know if there are different income groups in your area? Do you know if there are richer and poorer people, or you have information about this?
We only know that there are 40 people under the poverty line, and the others probably not. So
Okay, yeah. So you have a poorer group here that might have special needs and special that are maybe more or have less water available, or maybe a poorer retreat. Excellent. Good. Next group is here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we talked about that in our village. It's mostly women and children who go fetch the water. So,
Gender thing?
yeah.
Yeah.
So our solution should be, I don't know, understandable for the women and children to use.
Yeah. Yeah. So something you need to target your intervention
Yeah.
maybe towards a specific age group, the children,
Yeah.
and a specific gender group. Yeah.
And most women, yeah.
Okay. Good. Group over here or here? Here.
We have two different ethnic groups or
Yes.
race. 'Cause
Yes.
We have both Maasai and Russia, so
Yes.
treat them differently maybe.
Do you have any idea whether they have different water or sanitation practices?
Not really,
No?
but the Maasai are more traditional and yeah.
Yeah. Are they nomads? Huh?
Semi-nomadic.
Semi-nomadic.
Yeah.
So they have actually several places they stay.
Up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would.
Wander around the area with their cattle and stuff. Like,
Okay.
to find.
Yeah. So they have several settlements. That will actually influence a lot on what you need to think about in terms of where do we put the water source, how many latrines do they have a latrine in each place, or do they have different sanitary practices depending on where they stay? Yeah. Great. Good. Here, down there.
In terms of gender, as the other group says that we need to target the women, and maybe the women don't want to be taken away from a meeting point, so they are actually enjoying themselves when they stand in line for the pond, and so getting a personal water supply is maybe not in their interest.
Yeah. Because then they will have to work more at home. instead of having a break while they're waiting for the water. Yeah. There have been studies showing that actually. But there have also been studies showing how grateful people are to get water inside their house. So don't automatically assume that it's like that. You have to investigate it further in your study site. Yeah. Great. Are you a group here? Yeah?
Yeah.
One example from your group?
We also thought about income, because the more specific in our poor village, the more income you have, the better. Or the more you have an opportunity to have a latrine and stuff.
Yeah. And it will influence what kind of design you can offer, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be quite
Right.
low cost. Yeah. Okay. Any other things from your group that haven't been mentioned?
Political systems?
Yeah?
Well, it was written that was it they voted for the wrong guy, so that kind of
It was whether they were accepted for a project
Yeah.
on water, wash, sanitation, but they didn't vote for the political party that they wanted to, so they weren't accepted.
And that can create big tensions and big barriers if you want to implement a project that's not really well accepted. Yeah. The two last groups here, do you have, or are you one group, two groups? Do you have anything new? Any other factors that hasn't been mentioned?
Maybe just the school system could be better, learning people about sanitation.
Yeah.
So the social infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah, and the institutional organizations that you have, because institutions might be good focus points for interventions, right? So if you have a school there, maybe can you offer something at the school there? Because maybe it's a natural meeting point for people. Yeah. Are any of your cases, are people living in compounds? Or living in extended families? Or are they all living in small, separate households? Do you know about that? No, maybe not. Because that also, of course, creates very different patterns for sanitation and water usage, depending whether the social unit is a small mom, dad, 2 kids unit, or whether it's an extended family unit, or whether it's actually 5 households living together and sharing a well. So the social infrastructure is very important to look at for you. Yeah? In your case, definitely the Maasais and the others tribe might have very different ways of organizing themselves. Yeah. Okay, great. So you can think about now different social, economic, cultural classifications when you think about your interventions. The next thing I want you to think about is that actually this issue that many of you noticed that we have some technology. But what happens when we introduce this water and sanitation or hygiene technology to people? What happens is that the correct behavior does not follow automatically with the right technology. That's a standard rule no matter where you are. Even in DTU with this high-tech sensor, no-touch technology, things go wrong, right? So here are 2 examples of a school toilet and a health clinic in Vietnam. They have school toilets. Danita has actually sponsored them, many of them. But when you go to school, what happens? It's locked. So the children cannot access it. I mean, then a toilet doesn't create a good sanitation behavior, does it? And here's the health clinic. They took off the water tap from the water basin, and they're using it as a storage place or whatever. They thought it was a nuisance to have this tap there, and then they have to keep it clean all the time. So they dismantled it. They rather want to go and fetch water at the old water source. And these are health experts. They have a health, biomedical health education, but they still have their own logics for doing what they do in terms of hygiene. And you need to get inside people's head to understand these strange logics that people are using, because they are not illogical. They are logical to people, but they are just not the engineering logic or the microbiological logic. So this is what you need to understand, why this happens. If you look at this one, this is another study on schools in Vietnam, schools that actually have hand washing basins with soap. And then they monitored, just like you did in the canteen, how many children actually go and use these hand washing stations after urinating or after stooling. I don't know if that word is actually exists, but after
Yes.
defecation. Look at this. I think it's 1.6% washes hands after urination, and 11.5% wash hands with soap after defecation. These children have been educated in school about using hand washing and using hand washing with soap. But even if it's their perfect setup, children are not using it. So we need to find out what's going on here. The technology is there, but the right behavior doesn't follow. So we need to find out why.
How old are they?
I think it's a primary school. It's a study of primary school. It's from 5 years to 11 years.
Where?
It was also in Vietnam, in a rural province of Vietnam. Yeah.
Because I have a boy,
Yeah.
and he is 5 years old, and he doesn't wash his hands because of the strålserne.
Yeah. The ghosts.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the ghost would be very angry with him if
If he washes hands.
So we have a big problem.
You know, kids can come up with all kinds of arguments for why they do or why they don't. And we need to find a setup that allows children to wash their hands. And there's a lot of, I'll show you later, but there's a lot of experiments going on with children where you try to make hand washing fun. You know, it's a game, it's a play, like a competition, who can be the cleanest and stuff like that. That works for children, right? It's always good to have games with children. Okay. So what is actually influencing hand washing behavior? This is a big study from 11 countries. Data from 11 countries collected here. These are the factors. That's what people are telling the researchers why they are washing their hands. And the researchers had these two categories: personal motivations and environmental and societal barriers. These, I think, are very clear-cut for engineers, right? We need to have the basic infrastructure there. But even if it's there, social norms and all these factors will decide whether people are washing their hands or not. Is there anything strange here for you? Yeah?
There's no help.
There's no health? No? People don't mention health as a motivation for washing hands. It's not what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about bacteria and microbiological dangers or diseases or epidemics. Did you meet any of these in your studies? In your exercise? In your answers? Yeah?
I think habit was a big factor.
Habit, yeah. Try to think just for yourself. Where did you learn to wash your hands? When did you learn to wash your hands? Can you remember? Never. I remember very clearly, it was in kindergarten. And I had one teacher in kindergarten that taught us all to wash our hands. And I still remember how she did it, how she taught me to wash hands. So it's a habit I had from kindergarten. It was maybe developed later on, and now I'm paranoid about hand washing because I'm doing hygiene research. But I can remember when the habit was started. Can you also remember? No? Most people can actually remember when they first learned something, where it was. Yeah. Nurture. Do you know what that's about? Yeah.
Like taking care of others?
Yeah. So who could that be a relevant motivational factor for?
Mothers?
Yeah, mothers and fathers. So taking care of their families or taking care of their children. That's the reason why they wash hands, because it's a good thing to, it's taking care, it's supporting. Yeah. You had something? No?
Me?
Yeah?
No?
No. Status. Have you ever heard about that? What is that about? So there's lots of people who say that if you wash your hands, it's a kind of a proper thing to do. You're a proper clean person, right? So it gives you some status. You're showing that you're a proper person. You're taking care of yourself, and you're showing I'm not lazy about my appearance. I'm taking care of what I look like, right? I can tell you that in my study in Vietnam, I drove up to this mountain village every day on a motorbike, and I spent time in these families that had lots of small children that were most of the time really dirty. because they were just running around, and it was a very muddy place, and the mothers, they would wash them in the evenings, and then one day on my way up the mountain, a family came down the mountain on the motorbike, and I just could not see who it was, and there were only like 20 families there. So I went to the village and I said, who was that just leaving there? They look so nice on that motorbike. Oh, that was a family from over there, they said. And then half an hour later they came back, and it was this family that I spent weeks and weeks with, and I couldn't recognize them because they were all shining clean, and the children were so nice, you know, really nice hair, great dresses and everything. And I asked them, why did you go to something special? We went to the doctors, he said. And you know, if we want to get a proper treatment and be treated well by the doctor, we have to look nice and clean. This gives them a better status in the eyes of the doctor. They know that, these people. So they clean up real nicely when they go to the doctors. I thought it was really clever of them, right? They can actually manage these factors, and they can kind of impress the doctors. I think that's really nice.
But I mean, wouldn't they get the wrong treatment? I mean, if they go there dirty, the doctor will see that they're dirty, and they will help them with that. I mean, doesn't
they will yell at them. The doctors would yell at them and treat them very badly, and patronize them, look down at them. And these minority parents, they know that if they clean up, they have a better chance of arguing with the doctor and having a certain position. It gives them. And you're right, it's maybe wrong that the doctor is behaving like that, but we are all behaving like that depending on what positions we have in relation to other people. And this status is actually framing a lot of our behavioral patterns. Okay? That was hand washing. Now sanitation. There's actually quite a lot of very interesting sanitation studies done around the world now that shows that there are many interesting things that you need to take into account before you build a toilet. You need to know what are people's priorities. And this study is from Benin, and it's a study that lines up all the motivational factors for people to invest in a toilet. Have a look at this. It's a ranked list, so number 1 is more important. You can always hear when people get to this point, yeah? Then people start to laugh. So are there any very interesting things here that you don't understand? What is that about? Yeah?
Check my feces from my enemies.
Yeah? Protect my feces from my enemies. Does anybody know what that's about? Anybody has an explanation? Yeah?
Keep your friends close, keep your friends.
Yeah, some superstitious.
Superstition connected with feces, like it
Yeah.
comes from you, and I don't know, you could hit it with a nail.
Hit it
I
with
don't
a
know,
nail?
it's just-
Yeah, just a guess. Yeah,
I guess.
yeah. But it is connected to some animist traditional beliefs that you can use fecal material to perform like witchcraft. Yeah. So if you leave your feces around, somebody can pick it up and cast a spell on you. Yeah. And that's so leaving your stuff around is not a good thing. Yeah. So that is actually motivating people to have a kind of toilet where you can compost it or keep it so it doesn't lie around. Yeah. Any other strange things that you don't know? Why is that? Do you know what this is about? Any explanation? Could I ask you about that? Do you know what that's about? Feeling royal? Because you are from Ghana, and I know that in Ghana you have a similar system to Benin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe not like going out and didn't aim her to do anything, but it makes you feel quite big and all that.
Yeah.
To have something of your own.
Yeah, and this royalty.
It's something like a kingdom or something like
Yeah.
that. And if we say well, means that maybe you have money or there's something about you that's exceptional.
Yeah. So in Benin, just like in Ghana, you still have traditional kingdoms. So people still know what kingdoms they are attached to, even though it's not the official power structure. It's kind of a parallel power structure. And these royal families, they still have a quite very high social status, isn't it? Yeah. So if you can have things that the royal families also have, it makes you feel royal. And of course, they have modern toilets. Some of these royal families. So you need to know quite a lot about the local context in order to understand some of these things. Yeah. Any other strange things? Yeah.
Well, reduced healthcare expenses comes before for health. So
Yeah.
apparently, money connected to being sick is experienced worse than being sick.
Yes, you could say that. I think this for health is often, the disease-related motivation. So, for example, you said, they don't know that it would make them sick. It's a bacterial danger, right? That in itself is not a high priority, but the expenses related to being sick is very important. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that you are thinking? This is. Can you think of other motivational factors to have a toilet? Because this is just one study, but I think it's a very nice list to start from, but there are other factors, of course. Think about others. Have you heard about any other? Yeah?
Well, it's related to reduce flies in the compound, but it's also reduce smell.
Yes. Reduce smell is a very important motivational factors in many settings for different reasons. We'll get back to them. Yes?
Protecting the environment.
Protecting
the environment.
The environment, yes. So environmental conscious, so it's less dirty. There's less dirt around. Yeah, that is also mentioned in several studies. Yeah? Yeah. For different reasons. Not only for it's disgusting to have feces around, but also very related to sense of aesthetics. So if you have a very clean environment, you're also showing to others that I'm able to have a nice clean environment. Just in my lunch break, I talked with Torbjørn and Henrik about menstrual hygiene. Menstrual hygiene, that's also a very important gender-related factor, motivational factor for having a toilet. So for girls and for women to have a place where they can go in and manage their, perform menstrual hygiene, wash themselves, and dispose of any menstrual waste is an important factor, and it's becoming more and more acknowledged now. Yeah? Okay, so think about these things and investigate, are there any perceptions in your sight that might actually be the reasons why people would like to have a toilet? Okay, so some examples of toilets. This is a toilet from a highland village in Vietnam. It has a 2-chamber composting latrine design. Have you heard about that? Yes, you just heard about design, right? So inside there are 2 slabs with a concrete cover on it, and they're using one hole, right? And they have a urine diverting pipe actually, so the urine runs out of the toilet at the back, and the feces is kept in a vault there, right? Nice superstructure, everything was paid for. This toilet is not being used. Do you know why? It's not very light in this village. There were only 4 latrines installed, and when I came, I think it was 3 years later, none of them worked. Do you have any ideas of why they don't like it? Yeah?
Maybe people didn't want to clean the pits up after they.
Yeah. Because it actually stays there. You have to do something about the pit when it's full. Yeah. Any other ideas? Yeah?
Maybe they want flushing.
Maybe they prefer flushing, yeah. And this dry technology, maybe they don't think is very nice. Yeah. Yeah.
There's no pipes in the small.
So there might be a smell? Yeah. Any other ideas? Yeah.
Could be too warm.
Could be too warm inside. Yeah, because it's a quite closed superstructure. It's concrete and bricks. Yeah. Yeah. Good ideas. These were the reasons why. Yeah.
Our teacher told us that if they're not paying for their own latrines, they will not take care of it. So
Yeah.
maybe they haven't paid for
Excellent. These are fully subsidized latrines. They don't pay anything, but they do provide labor. So all the materials and everything they're giving, and then they build them together with the engineers that came. Yeah, that's right. And it is true in this village, they really did not care about these latrines at all. They didn't want to maintain them at all, and they didn't have any sense of ownership because of these things. So, who said the smell? It's a closed superstructure, and there's a lot of smell in there. They really think it's highly disgusting, because it's very tightly connected to some local perceptions about dirt. What is dirty and what is clean, and smell in an Asian medical perception. Smell is able to penetrate your body through the holes and make you sick. Smell carries sickness. So if you're in a smelly place, you are very exposed to being sick. That's their perception. And actually in Europe, if you go back to the 15th, 16th century, it was exactly the same. So these ideas of bacteria as transmitting diseases are fairly new actually in our culture. And here in Asia, these perceptions are very prevalent. So it's very logical for them to get away from places with smell, right? They have no reuse practices in this place. They don't use fecal matter as fertilizers in the fields. So this design with composting makes no sense to them. They think it's highly disgusting. Yeah? Yes?
Were they asked if they wanted latrines and what kind of latrines?
No. And like the gentleman on the back here also said, they were not asked and they were just given without paying anything. They were not part of the planning, they were not part of the building or anything. So that's amazing. Do you see the pic here? So what did they do to solve this issue, these guys? They actually broke down, or they opened up the composting chamber at the back. They broke the seal and they leave it open because the smell gets away, it evaporates, and the pigs can eat the fecal matter. And then you're rid of the fecal matter, you're rid of the smell. It's a logical solution, right? It's their logic, and that's what we need to understand. In terms of all kinds of health dangers, it's really wrong, right? This is a logical solution if you have these perceptions, and this is what you need to understand before you put in a latrine.
Why is that dangerous to health?
For example, there's a lot of helminths that can be transmitted directly from the fecal matter to the pigs, and if you eat the pig meat, especially if you eat it raw or not so well cooked, you get the helminths or you get the cysts in your body, and that will create quite serious diseases. But also just because they are stepping in it, the pigs, and they're just spreading it around the village. So instead of concentrating the dirt and the smell here, you have it spread all over the place. Okay, this is in Laos. I had a master student, went to Laos and did a study on the latrine program and found out that very nice latrines have been built and they don't like it. Why do you think? This is a single chamber pig latrine with concrete slab. It's not composting. They have a very big concrete slab, and this is just closed, sealed when it's full, and it's moved to a different place, which is, I think, design-wise, it's over-engineered, I think. But they don't use it. Why do you think so?
There's a watchdog.
There's a watchdog. Yeah, it's dangerous to go to the toilet. Yeah. Yes?
Does it smell inside?
Yeah.
Bad?
Actually, here the smell is not so bad because this is bamboo mats, so it's quite transparent. The smell can evaporate. Yeah. Yes.
If you're close to the building.
It's close to the house. Yeah, could be. Yeah.
It's in a public place, maybe they don't like that other people know that they go.
Yeah, And in different studies, that's also what you mean. It's close to the house, but that's here in the front row. Was that what you mean when
Yeah,
it's close to
too
the?
close to the other houses.
Too close to the other houses. Okay. So you say that it's out here, so you can see people walking from the house to the toilet, and that's maybe awkward. Yeah. So it's not the issue here, but it has been shown in other studies. Yeah. What else? It's a super nice latrine. Yeah? It works well. And that's actually what is the problem. It's too nice.
Oh my god.
This is one of the nicest buildings in the village. It's an extremely poor village. And it's so well engineered, and it's stable and everything. And they simply, what they do is they put a lock on it and they use it as the storage room or the garage for their rice or for their motorbikes. Right? Why you shit in a place which has been paid for and it's so nice? Why not use it for something that's really valuable? And the most valuable things they have is the rice and the motorbike. You can find all kinds of these cases all around the world. This is not because they are very special and funny examples. There are so many examples of sanitation projects that have failed because the engineers have not asked people what they think before they get the toilets. So it's your job to understand what kind of logics people have, right? Another big thing about sanitation projects is that a lot of the people we want to give a toilet are actually not there most of the time. If you think about an urban setting, slum area, people are very rarely home in their small, maybe they have just a bed in the corner of a house where they're sharing with 10 others. So a home toilet might not be the perfect solution. Maybe they need a toilet at their workplace instead. So lots of things to think about. Okay, so we'll take the last example before the break. Water. No more hand hygiene, no more latrines, now it's water. What is important for people when they choose their water source? Probably you've heard of something about it. I would like to start about asking one of you who doesn't live in Denmark, who is volunteering, who's from out of the country. Yeah. What do you think about the Danish water? Or the Danish drinking water? It's clean? Do you drink it right from the tap? Yes. Yes. Another one from out of town. Do you drink it from the tap?
Yes.
Yes.
There's too much salt.
But there's too much salt?
Yeah.
Yeah? Is it?
It's too hard, for example, if you use the water boiler, just gets lime all over.
Completely, yeah.
It's also not taste-wise as nice. I mean, water toilet in Switzerland.
What kind of taste is it that you
It's
don't
hard
like?
to describe. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it doesn't taste so.
It doesn't taste like your home water.
Yes.
It's not so fresh. Yeah?
Jeg troede, det var en anden.
Anybody else who's not from Denmark? Yeah?
It's amazing that they drink water from the toilets. I mean,
Yes.
one of the new perception that it is not very good quality because it's from the toilet.
So how do you mean
from
drinking?
From the sinks of the toilet.
From the sinks
Yeah.
inside the toilets?
Yes.
Yeah? So you have sinks with drinking water and toilets in the same room and you drink from the tap that's right next to a toilet. Yeah? Strange. Yeah? Any others who are not from Denmark? What do you think about the Danish drinking water?
I think I also saw how it tastes. And for the first weeks, I didn't take it because it would taste.
Yeah.
But now I'm used to it.
Okay, so you have a new habit now. Yeah?
It's not that fresh and it's not that cold either.
Mm?
It's very warm.
Yeah. So what do you do?
I use my filter.
Yeah? Any of you buy bottled water and drink instead of using the tap water? Lots of people actually do that in Denmark now because they can't get used to the taste. So taste, habit, it's not like my old water, it's not like the home water are some of the factors that are deciding. There are other factors. Distance, you said distance to the source, right? The type of source, the amount of water you can get, who owns the water, cost, and many, many other factors are shaping the people's perceptions about water. Ownership. What is that about? Have an example.
But
it not so good to share? You know that?
I think the water source, not a sense of wealth for the village, but you know it increases the village's like it puts it in a better position
Yeah.
than the other village,
Yeah.
which they perhaps would like to.
Yeah. So having a private water source or water connection is affiliated with very high social status. Is that what you're saying? Oh. Yeah. So one village compares themselves to other villages, and we have a better water source than the yeah.
I think ownership and status.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. So these are things that you also need to consider before you put in a water connection. Last word on water. The water quality itself. I mean, probably as water engineers, you are learning all kinds of water criteria, like standards for how much pH, how much microbiological load, etc., etc., etc. People, of course, have their own things that they're thinking about in terms of evaluating the quality. Taste, you mentioned. Color. I mean, I think I actually did a course in Zanzibar together with Henrik where he taught people to measure turbidity. That was the first time I heard of the word turbidity. And people, in their own words, they would maybe say the color or the clarity, what the water looks like is important, right? The source, whether it's a surface or spring water, it's very important. In some cultures, spring water carries religious values almost. For example, I've just been to Bhutan in the Himalayan mountain. A spring is sacred. And wherever there's a spring coming out of the mountain, you will put a temple. And there will be monks living there that use the water for spiritual purposes. So spring water is much, much, much better quality than surface water, no matter what the microbiological quality might be. The smell of the water. Anybody knows what water smells like? No, not really, yeah. But there are some places that water really does smell. What does the Danish water smell like? Sweet? Sweet? Yeah. So for non-Danish people, they are able to actually distinguish a smell of the water, but because we are so used to it, maybe we don't know. Whether it's stagnant or moving is also very important to many people. So moving water is often logically more clean because it's being flushed and rinsed. But as an engineer, you might know that moving water also has a lot of sediment because it's being disturbed all the time. So actually letting water settle might be more microbiologically sensible, right? But to people, it might be the other way around, and many other criteria. So that was finished for all the sociocultural and strange perceptions that people might have about sanitation, hand washing, and water that you need to think about. Okay? So, break time. What would you like to, what do you already know, or what would you like to know about people's perceptions that could influence your interventions?
We were thinking about location. For example, how willing are people to, like, what distances do they want to walk for a water supply? Or how far away do they want to place the latrine from the house, for example, because of smell or fear? Or location-wise.
Location. Excellent. Yeah. This being near the house or being away from the house are interpreted in many different ways in different cultures. Some cultures, if it's right next to the kitchen, it's perfectly acceptable, and in other cultural settings, you would want to have it as far away from the food as possible. So these things are very context-based. Yeah, excellent. This group here.
Safety?
Safety?
For children?
For children? In terms of?
Can they fall down the hole?
Yeah, so in terms of designing the toilets in a way that doesn't scare the children away. Yeah. Do you know anything about the perceptions already? Or? what ideas they have about toilets.
I just know that we talked about it before, so we have thought about it. I don't know if it's because somebody said something or yeah, I don't know. Actually.
But it's a bit, I mean, it's a taboo to talk about issues.
Yeah.
So that might be linked
Yes.
to it.
It might not be a taboo to talk about feces. You have to investigate if it is a taboo. In some cultures, in some settings, people are surprisingly free to talk about feces, but it might be that it's difficult to get people involved in a discussion about fecal matter. Yeah. And there are studies showing all kinds of perceptions about being in a small dark room. There might be ghosts or evil spirits in there, or there might be snakes or other dangerous animals. There are all kinds of studies showing when people have perceptions about dangers and fears and safety. Very nice. Yes?
When you say evil spirits, I was thinking that it might be useful to try and also tap into the different belief systems there is about the world here, and maybe instead of addressing bacteria as the problem, you say there's evil spirits in the poop.
Yeah.
Because that's the language that you speak here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does it make
It makes a lot of sense, and thank you for that comment. So,
or if like in India, they have a lot of respect for their gods,
yeah.
and I don't know if there's a god of sanitation, but and they have thousands of gods.
Yes, yes.
And there might be something there that you
yes,
could
it
use
could
as
be.
motivation.
Yes, and ancestral spirits. So in Vietnam, for example, they worship ancestors. They have a very high value, ancestral spirits, and you can't pollute places that are important to the ancestral spirits. So tapping into these belief systems and understanding the language that people use is very important. Yeah. Yes?
But we cannot go around telling people that there are spirits in their feces, can we? Are we not making people dumber then?
Well, what do you think about that? Let's discuss that. That's an interesting comment. Yeah.
I think it would be slightly misuse of our status. That I imagine we would have if we went to Tanzania. You have instinctively from the color of your skin, it's this opposite prejudice where you have a lot of authority, I think, and then using that authority to convince people using arguments that you know are wrong. I think would be ethically wrong.
So when you say convincing people about things that are wrong, you mean that it's wrong that they believe in
No.
ghosts or spirits? Or?
Well, I mean that we are taking advantage of their belief and using it against them. Not against them, for their benefit. But yeah, I still think it's a misuse.
I mean, you don't have to tell wrong ways or lies, but you maybe use some pictures. I mean, you can't go to Tanzania and give them a 2-hour lectures about bacteria and viruses. It has to be understand, so you can bring it maybe down to a level where the principle is understood, and you can maybe go on a level like connect it to wrong things, and you don't say spirit, other things is in this food and this spirit, you know, but just maybe use pictures from known systematics, known beliefs, and just explain it with that in a way they understand it.
And you?
Yeah, but I'm thinking if people are religious in Denmark, which we understand much, and maybe there is a traffic accident and people say, oh, it's God fake.
Yeah.
Isn't that the same? I mean, you can as an engineer say, well, no, it's just because your brake didn't work or something like that, but people will say, but it's a fake.
Yeah.
This could be the same, and just as long as you tell them the facts, as you say, and then maybe just take some of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments? Yeah.
My imagination of the whole of East Africa, even though I don't know all of it, is that people are very pragmatic in terms of religion. You can go to the best church in the area where they serve the best food, and the same way they use religion in terms of explaining things that are not related to religion. So I don't think they will have a problem at all using the symbol of the spirits in different kind of things. They know that that's not all of religion. They are very pragmatic in terms of choosing these things.
Yeah. For me, when we talk about these different perceptions and cultures, it's not a question of what is wrong and what is right and what is ignorant and what is more aware. We are more aware and they are ignorant. These categories doesn't work. They don't work. These categories. This way of thinking doesn't work, right? Because no matter what you do when you enter into the world as an engineer and you want to make an intervention, you have to make it work and it has to fit into the context you are in. So you get nowhere if you just come with a solution that you know is correct and hammer it into the heads of people. You need to be able to meet with people and not go down to their level or they need to go up to our level. You need to meet and you need to understand people's own logics. And from there you design something that everybody's happy with. So for me it's not a question of going down to their level or they need to know all about they need to reach our awareness level and they need to know about these microbiological theories and bacterial dangers and so on. It's a question of understanding each other and then designing something that fits into that social and cultural context. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think you should get rid of these ideas of what is better knowledge and what is bad knowledge. People have the knowledge and the perceptions and ideas they have, and we can of course educate them, but we can't change all the whole cultural perceptions they have. Yeah? You had a, no? Small comment. And one more group, then we'll move on. Any other perceptions you would like to investigate? Or it's all been said? Okay, so that was it. Now we're moving on to the next topic, which is on hygiene promotion. So now the whole issue is here, how do we work with all these perceptions and all these ideas that people have? And how do we design campaigns or campaigns that work? We can do that in many, many different ways, and the next lecture you will be introduced to different schools of thought in terms of how to make hygiene promotion. And there are 4 overall categories of these ways of doing it, and I'll give you an example for each of them. And in the end, I'll ask you to consider what kind of campaign could you do in your areas, right? So, we look at this arrow. If we think back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, most of the health information campaigns, they were this type. They were educational campaigns that are information-based, so you're giving people a message about health, or about disease, or about some behavior that is incorrect, and you write, usually it's been written material, posters, pamphlets, flyers, things that are posted on walls of houses and so on, and you write what is the correct way. And do you remember the hand washing poster earlier? See if I can. Here. So here are some examples of these educational materials, hygiene promotion materials. These approaches, these purely information-based approaches, are still very, very common many places. So you see tons of materials being developed, written materials like these, in hundreds and thousands, and posted on walls all over the place. What is important to know about these is that they can raise some awareness. People can get some more knowledge, but it doesn't change behaviors if it stands alone. Right? People will get more informed about something, but not necessarily change behaviors. So if you're planning some educational materials, you have to follow up with something else. Can you think about any written materials for health campaigns that you've seen recently? The Ebola, yeah. Have you seen something in Denmark? Det kræver sin mælk. That's a local motto for drinking milk. Yes. You see it on the poster or on a...
Was it Arla?
Arla?
I think it's their own marketing. Okay. I thought it was a kind of
Have you seen these posters for washing hands during the H1N1 influenza epidemic? Yeah, that are posted in the bathroom sometimes. Yeah, maybe you remember vaguely that you've seen them, but they don't really change your hand washing behaviors, just to look at these posters, right? Sorry. So then, after the 70s, a lot of people realized that, okay, we need to develop this, and the next kind of school of thought that came up was these community-based approaches that were far more participatory than before. Before it was much more indirect and passive knowledge delivering, and now all these kinds of community-based approaches were designed that involve people to some degree in changing some health behaviors or conditions. And one of the most famous ones is the FAST, participatory hygiene and sanitation. Is it technologies or strategies, or I can't remember the T. But it's a kind of it's a systematic approach to give people some knowledge and design some interventions. I'll get back to it. And another famous one is the CLTS, the community-led total sanitation, which is a very debated approach to sanitation promotion. We'll also get back to that. And this turned out to actually be much more effective than this, involving people in the processes so they develop ownership. And now somebody also mentioned that. But more recently, in the 90s, I think it was, some people discovered that, looked at who are really effective at changing people's behaviors, who are really good at it. And they found out that in the commercial sector, in the industry, they are really good at designing things that can make people buy whatever, right? They're really good at convincing people to invest in something. So these new approaches called social marketing strategies were developed that are drawing heavily on principles from the commercial area. And they are using all these marketing analysis to understand people's behaviors. What is really new about these approaches is that there's usually no subsidies connected to it. It's usually actually about convincing people to buy something. So it's not supply driven, it's not about giving people something, it's about creating a demand for something instead. So actually convincing people to want something that increases or improves their health. What is also new about this type of hygiene promotion is that it's no longer only focused on convincing people that it's good for their health. They are now beginning to use all these social and cultural motivators that we have talked about in the first session. They really understand that this is what is changing behavior. It's not talking about health. This is a major change in how we promote health and hygiene today. Now, the latest development is all kinds of approaches that are mixing all kinds of things from these and other things. For example, edutainment. You can see the word, what it consists of. So it's an educational approach that uses entertaining components. So it's, for example, developing a TV series that has an educational content. So, for example, in Brazil, there's an immensely popular TV series called. Now I've skipped my mind. Well, whatever. It's a TV series, and it has all kinds of health and social contents. It's about domestic violence. It's about HIV/AIDS. It's about using condoms. They can put whatever in it, and it's so popular. It's seen by millions of people every day. So they can communicate about health very effectively through entertaining platforms. BCC, Behavior Change Communication, is an approach where you use communication very strategically. You analyze very carefully what people think and what they know, and you create a campaign that draws on different motivators. Okay, these are the four main schools within health education and hygiene promotion. And there are other trends as well that you might come across that don't look like this. For example, setting-specific approaches. For example, school hygiene campaigns that uses the school as the setting right? And then it draws on principles for these four. I'm now going to show you one example from each, and we're going to analyze it together, what the designers of these campaigns thought. Okay, so you saw the educational material already. It's stuff like this. You've seen tons of it. So the more participatory approaches, I'm going to show you a video from the community-led Total Sanitation campaign. And then we're going to talk about what motivational or behavioral drivers do they use here to communicate or to convince people to use toilets.
Many multicultural towns in Uganda like Toro and Luwero districts have had problems mainly of open defecation. Plan Uganda initiated an open defecation-free campaign under the community-led Total Sanitation to solve this problem. Today, the changes that appeared minor at the start are positively impacting on these communities.
What CLTS has done is now to see the communities at the forefront, first of all, of mobilizing fellow community members to take action to solve a problem.
This is the story of a shit-free community, a community that chose to change the way they dispose their human waste. A short walk around the nearby bush would reveal a clear picture of open defecation. In many homes, defecating in the open was normal. Any place was convenient to dispose feces, not knowing its end results. How then did these communities manage to change their behavior and achieve this open defecation-free status? This is a triggering process where the community gets to know who shits where. Through this simple exercise, community members are made to understand the simple channels that led to contamination and caused illnesses. This is a triggering session at Gembe Primary School in Luwero. Children are able to identify who shits where in the community surrounding their school.
Senja kugamba abaana twekwate ka group tugende tulongose toyi buli lunaku.
This is Chalugondo Primary School in Luwero District. Here we find children attending a health club meeting. They share knowledge about community sanitation, discuss the challenges and the way forward.
Buzibu bwe twali tusanga ng'abantu abamu tebalina kaabuyonjo. Kati ng'enswa ziyinza okgenda oba ng'oli yatadde wali eri obukyafu bwe ne bujja ku kyokulya kyo ky'ogenda okulya.
Tuyonjayo naye bwe tuyonjayo ku makya ne baddayo ate tuba tulina okuddamu obuleggulo oba omunaana.
This school was declared open defecation free. To understand the role of VHTs, we meet a 52-year-old Muzei Taga in Chalugondo Parish, Luwero, who had no toilet for more than 2 years. Thanks to the village health team members who constructed a latrine for him. In order to improve hygiene practices, VHTs often meet to share experiences and accomplishments in each of their communities. Musazi is their chairperson.
Ensonga ya kabuyonjo yo mu luka lwaffe gw'ekyalugondo yeri 10 ku 10.
VHT members not only sensitize the communities, but also conduct follow-ups through monitoring and verifying the progress of the communities and individuals. Opie Samuel is one of the success stories that have inspired communities in Molo Sub-County in Toro District. In spite of his disability, Samuel has been able to build a home, including this latrine, and keep his homestead clean. This homestead is headed by this 14-year-old girl after the loss of their parents. It's interesting, these children have a toilet and they all know how to use it and maintain a proper hygiene in their home. In 2012, several communities were declared open defecation free. The celebrations marked the success of the community-led total sanitation intervention. In this campaign, planners worked with other stakeholders to provide affordable latrine options through sanitation marketing. These low-cost latrine slabs are recommended for ventilated improved latrines in the communities.
And even the community is very happy about this improved type of latrines because it has helped at least to improve on the hygiene.
But all this success did not come without challenges. Success can only be achieved through a collective action of all community members, young and old alike.
My first priority when I came to power was to address the health problem in Toro district, and mainly the pit latrine coverage.
The stories of these individuals and communities will continue to echo in the lives of many people and continue to inspire others for generations. Thanks to Plan Uganda and their partners worldwide.
Okay. What are the drivers they are making use of in this campaign to convince people not to shit in the open and to use the toilet? What are the drivers? Let me hear.
Well, they kind of make them feel disgusted of that behavior. They expose it or show their own behavior in a way so they perceive it as disgusting.
Disgust is a major thing, yeah? Yeah?
Blame.
Blaming.
Like, like the other people's.
Yeah. Yeah. Exposing people's bad behaviors, right? What else? What did the children say? Yeah?
We want to exercise good vision.
Yeah, good vision. Anything else? Yeah?
Spreading the news, spreading information.
Yeah? Yeah? Spreading information or coming to a consensus in the village, right? That we need to change this. Yeah. Yeah? Yes?
The parents be responsible.
Yeah?
That is our nature, our school, and they have to keep it clean.
Yeah? 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 Group norm, maybe? Does that capture what you mean? So, in the school, so then they agree that our school should be clean. Yeah? Okay. These are the main behavioral drivers they are making use of in CLTS, and as you can say, some of them are quite negative in nature, right? They are quite, they're putting pressure on people, each other, they are exposing people's identification behaviors, right? Very upfront. They're using disgust and also fear of this disease, right? Because they actually make them aware of how dangerous it is when you're shitting everywhere. You are actually creating disease in your own village. So these are kind of the motivational behaviors behind this. What do you think about this? Yeah?
I think that you need a quite sensitive facilitator in order not to have this run out of control and just people getting really angry.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right, because these are very, very potential drivers and they can really trigger, it's one of the methods they're using, trigger this community action that, oh, this is so disgusting, we need to do something together, but it can also run wild into some blaming and scapegoating and stuff like this, yeah?
If you don't give them some possibilities to solve this, then it will just be something that they do in disguise. It will be something that is taboo in the future.
Yes, yes. So you really need to follow up on this triggering process with something that is very constructive. Yeah. Let me just close this. this. So as you saw, they have this preparation phase, and they have this triggering phase, and then they have a follow-up phase. And what they do in the follow-up phase, and what is also very specifically special about this approach, is that they don't give out any subsidies. They don't give them any building materials. Instead, they plan together with them how to build their own low-cost, simple toilets. And they provide all kinds of encouragement, like prizes to open defecation-free villages. And they support leaders, natural leaders, people that emerge in this process as somebody who's really willing to make a difference and change defecation behaviors. What is very different in this CLTS approach from any other sanitation promotion program is that it uses these negative motivational factors, and there's no subsidies and no hardware, and they don't. They also allow people to build toilets in any way they want. So they don't give them like some specific technologies, which is also the critique of CLTS. Is that it's very, very effective in increasing the numbers of cheap latrines very fast. But whether those types of simple latrines are actually sustainable and design-wise, manageable, it's really questionable. There are some big evaluations coming out now, and it doesn't look too good. Many of these latrines will be broken down the year after if you don't manage to follow up and to move people up the sanitation ladder. Have you heard about that? Sanitation. So if you don't manage to bring people steps up and improve the technologies stepwise, then you might end up with an open defecation village again. Okay. That was an example of a community-based participatory approach. Now we move on to a social marketing approach. Again, I'm going to show you a video. This is something called the Easy Latrine. It's an Asian development enterprise called IDE that has launched this latrine, and it's a very big program now. And this is from Cambodia.
Four out of 5 families in Cambodia do not own a latrine. Instead, they go out to the fields and forests.
We work with IDEO to design a low-cost, do-it-yourself latrine called the Easy Latrine. It costs about $35 and it is very popular. Many families want to own it, and small enterprises are motivated to sell it.
We use community promotions and mass media to create awareness and demand for latrines. Something that people didn't like to talk about before is now creating a lot of excitement.
In only 7 months, the Easy Latrine has been purchased by 5,000 families with no subsidy. We calculate that each latrine brings $180 of financial benefits over 5 years.
Sanitation has proven to be a really good business opportunity, and now concrete producers from across the country want to learn how they too can produce easy latrines.
The Ministry of Rural Development is using IDE strategy into the plan. We are working together to develop a national campaign. We hope to reach millions of families.
Alright, this was the Easy Latrine. What kind of drivers are they using to convince people to invest in a latrine? Yeah?
The first person said that it was very popular.
Popularity. Yeah, yeah, yes. Popularity. Anything else? Just shout.
Capitalism.
What do you mean by that?
That the local enterprises are competing in making the
Yeah.
cheap solution.
Competition on market conditions, right? Yeah. Popularity. What else? Yeah. Low cost. Low cost. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Happy, smiling people.
And what do you mean by that?
Realkredit.
Yes.
Commercial.
Yes. So they actually put some money in the commercial side of it, in the commercial presentations, right? Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Is this a commercial that is shown in the country?
This was, I think, a part of summing up the program experiences and the milestones so far. So it was mainly used to promote the program to policymakers and stuff like that. But there are commercials running all over the country with these, these pamphlets and leaflets about the price and what you need to buy and how easy it is to get it built. And
But just it's a bit strange that they're using a white man.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it was to the local people, it would be a bit strange.
Yeah. So for the locals, the campaign they have designed is usually following the product line, right? So what they do is they go out and contact maybe 50 people who would like to be entrepreneurs and producers, and they ask them to promote these latrines to the villages. So the producers go out to make commercials in the villages and tell them, I can build a latrine. It's only $35 and it so and so. So they are actually designing the campaign along the product line, production line. Yeah. Anything else? There's a lot of status also, If you get this nice latrine, you're able to move away from this simple peasant life to actually be somebody who has a latrine. Yeah.
But wouldn't that be the same if they were given the latrines, the status and?
That could be. Yeah, you could also use status in many other campaigns.
Yeah.
And of course, the important thing here and the crucial thing is that it's demand or it's product centered, right? It's about buying one single product. That's the special thing about social marketing. So it's product oriented and it's optimizing products, right? So it's not just low cost, but it's actually really smart design that we are in here. There are many other social marketing campaigns in hygiene promotion. Have you seen any of them? The most famous one is about hand washing soap, so soap bars, branding soap in all kinds of different ways to different target groups. So you can make soap very popular for different segmented populations. Can you think about other types of social marketing campaigns in health campaigns where you are creating demand for a product? There are many in health campaigns. Can you think about something where you want people to buy something special that is attached to a nice hygiene or health behavior? Yeah? Exactly. So that was where social marketing in health was really invented. It's condom campaigns. There are many, many campaigns through times. Maybe you can remember some from the 90s and some newer ones. With the toothbrush. Yeah, kind of right. Okay, so you get the point about social marketing, right? These are some of the drivers they used. So, behavior change communication, which is the next school of thought. I'll show you two examples, one from Vietnam and one from Ghana. This is highly professionalized communication strategies that are also drawing a lot on marketing principles, where you are really analyzing the population you want to communicate with, and you design messages based on your knowledge about what are people's ideas and perceptions and aspirations. So the top one here is it's a picture from a World Bank funded hand washing campaign in Vietnam. It's a national hand washing campaign. And it's working. It's really effective. Who do you think is the main target group here? Yeah. Mothers, of course. What kind of mothers? Anybody? Good mothers. Good mothers. Exactly. Exactly. That's the whole point here, right? What do you think about when you say good mothers? Why do you say that? She takes care of you. Yeah. So they are really drawing on this nurture concept, right? Yeah. What else? What kind of mother?
The one who provides a good life with the food.
Yes.
Are you sure that they grow up?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, the nurture concept, taking care, supporting the children. Yeah.
I think house mother.
House mothers? Yes. Yes, you're right. Yeah. Yes.
Modern woman.
Modern
Nicely
woman.
dressed.
Yes. She looks kind of rich, doesn't she? I mean, smart at least. Yeah. Yeah.
I think maybe children.
Also children. Yeah. So I went to the World Bank headquarters in Hanoi and asked them about this because I was puzzled about why do they have a national campaign in a quite low-income country that portrays mothers like modern, clean, urban, maybe rich women. As I was really puzzled about, does it work? I asked her, and she said we really analyzed a huge sample of a couple of thousand mothers based on questionnaires, and we find out the strongest aspiration for a Vietnamese mother across the country is to become part of this middle class population. They really want to move up away from being poor and being this middle class. And this is the picture of a middle class family. You know, house mother, nice and clean, sending the children off to school every day. So this is a major motivator for women to have this. This is a picture of how they want to be. This is a dream. So this actually motivates women to buy soap. Okay, so they really made an effort to understand women in Vietnam before they designed this. The next one is a video from Ghana. It's also a hand washing campaign.
Whenever you use the toilet and do not wash your hands with soap, your hands pick up things you can't see. Washing your hands with just water can't make them truly clean. Remember to wash your hands with soap. You never know what you're feeding to your family.
For truly clean hands, always wash with soap.
Okay. Something you didn't understand?
Now we know what bacteria is.
Yeah. Now we know what bacteria looks like, Henrik is saying. What kind of drivers did they use in this campaign? By now you should be spitting it out. What drivers are they using? What motivational drivers are they using? Yeah? Disgust. Yeah? Anything else?
Fear.
Fear. Fear for...
infecting your children.
Yeah.
Diseases.
And for diseases.
And yourself.
And yourself. Yeah. What else? Yeah?
Exaggerations, like the color that was added.
Yeah? Is that exaggeration?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the poop wasn't like purple.
She went into the bathroom, she came out without washing
But
hands.
it's an effect, I mean, it's not natural.
Yeah, so it's visualization, right, of something that we can't see. Yeah, yeah. Yeah? It's also blaming, yeah, yeah, exactly. But it's also drawing on these nurture concepts, isn't it? Being a good mother, right? So it's everything together. It's these blame, fear, and then it's nurture on the other side. What happened in Ghana? Do you know what kind of dish she's cooking? Have you seen that before? Yeah? It's called fufu with crab soup. And this fufu is kind of a starchy material that's being pounded for a long time. So the carbohydrates, they break and it becomes like a jelly or mushy substance. And then you pour a soup on top of it and you eat it with your fingers. This is kind of a national dish of Ghana. And what actually happened in Ghana when this video was launched, it was very popular. It spread like a viral video very fast. What actually happened is that there was an outroar because a lot of people thought that now eating fufu is dangerous. And I mean, I'm not joking. So the way that people decode and translate these messages can end up in a very different place if you don't design your campaigns really, really carefully. Yeah? Okay. Last example is this healthy settings approach, school sanitation. It's very popular, so I thought you should know about it. There's lots of campaigns around schools. It's a natural place to change hygiene habits because it's early in life. You can influence children. You can teach them to wash their hands. But of course, you need to make sure that the facilities are there. It's a hand washing basin with taps broken off and with locks on the doors again. But if you do it right, you can really improve these small kids from an early age. This kindergarten in Vietnam is practicing hand washing twice a day, standing in a line, hand washing and face washing. And these small kids, this is 2 months after they started in kindergarten, they could do it all by themselves. So it's very potent, very efficient to target small children from an early age. Okay, so summarizing across all these kinds of campaigns, when you design anything, you need to think about these things. You need to think about evidence for health impact. Don't go and design a campaign where you teach children to brush their hair, because that does not have a major impact on health. Go for the maximum health impact, right? And you know it's hand washing, sanitation, it's water supply, and some food safety, for example. So go for the maximum effect. Be very specific about your target group, because general or generic campaigns, they don't work. You have to target your campaign. Cost is always an issue. How much money of your budget would you like to spend on sanitation and how much should go into campaigning? I think I did an estimation once that it's less than 5% in all kinds of major water and sanitation budgets by Danida that are being put into to promote hygiene promotion, which is too few money. So you have to find out how much you want to spend. You have to take care of these local norms and cultures. Now you know everything about that. And you have to change, for God's sake, focus on changing behavior rather than changing knowledge, because knowledge does not automatically lead to behavior.